let's move on to our second main topic today. And our second main topic today is submitted to us from Yanni Fotopoulos.
Fotopoulos.
Yeah,
Oh. Fotopoulos.
We're like, Fotopoulos.
Like Patrick Totopoulos.
I actually studied 2 years of Greek in theology school in seminary. You'd think I would know that name. All right. Hey, John, I completely agree with you that at some point in the future, we are going to see Robert Downey Jr. and Chris Evans back as Iron Man and Captain America. But I just read an article about how Robert Downey Jr. is now separating himself from the MCU and says he is just moving on. Do you guys buy it? All right, thanks a lot for sending that in, Yanni. And yeah, like, look, one of the big things, of course, that happened in Endgame was, you know, the departure, the exit of Robert Downey Jr. out of the MCU. There have been some people, like me, who have been saying, I guarantee you that maybe not this year, maybe not in 3 years, but at some point, you are going to see him back. Now, anyway, Robert Downey Jr., he's got a few projects on the go right now. He is now moving on with his career. He's moving on to the next phase of his life and what he's doing. And he was recently interviewed about that. And he basically did start saying, yeah, I'm moving on from the MCU and I'm not Tony Stark. This is what he said. Robert Downey Jr. said the following: I am not this play I'm doing. I'm not a character in the Fantastics.
Great reference.
I'm not Will from Oklahoma. Also a good reference. Aesthetic distance. It's job one. I am not my work. I'm not what I did with that studio. I'm not that period of time that I spent playing this character. I had an incredible 10-year run that was creatively satisfying. It was very, very hard work, and I dug deep, but I have not been forced to explore the new frontier of what is my creative and personal life after this. It's always good to get ahead of where you're about to be. So, you know, this is kind of a little bit in response to, for the last 10, 11 years, I mean, when you think of Robert Downey Jr., you don't think of the Academy Award nominated actor from Chaplin. You don't think of, you know, a guy who almost had a resurgence in his career with Ally McBeal. You think of Tony Stark. He has become synonymous with Tony Stark, and Tony Stark has become synonymous with Robert Downey Jr. at the same time. Now, when people see Robert Downey Jr. anywhere, they're always expecting to hear Tony Stark speak, and there's a little bit of connection for that. And to have Robert Downey Jr. come out at this point and start making comments like, look, everybody, I'm not him. I am not Tony Stark. I need to move. I was a great 10 years, everybody. Thank you for that. But it's time for now for me to move on and do other things. I have a couple of thoughts on the way he's kind of addressed that. On the one hand, I think it's absolutely understandable. Like, when you are constantly associated with just one thing, and you had, by the way, people forget, Robert Downey Jr. had a long, successful career, not barring any off-camera drama, but he had a long, successful career before he was ever Iron Man. And to now kind of be, maybe in his eyes, reduced, having his career reduced down to just one role that he played, that could be a little bit frustrating, especially as you're now trying to look forward to the future. At the same time, I would probably counsel him if he were to call me, because, you know, Robert calls me all the time. Were he to call me, I would probably counsel him to just be very cautious about how you address talking about separating yourself from the MCU, not just because your role as Tony Stark was the biggest thing you ever did in your career and is the biggest thing you ever will do in your career, but also because be very mindful of the fact that other people still know that you wouldn't have a career today if it wasn't for Iron Man. You wouldn't have a career today. He had had two magnificent, very public falls from grace with his own self-induced problems that he created. You know, he crashed out once. He started to have a comeback. He crashed out again. People fired him from projects, blah, blah, blah. And Jon Favreau had to go to battle to get the powers that be to agree to let this guy, Robert Downey Jr., who had flamed out a couple of times, to allow him to be Iron Man in this new comic book movie. They had to go to battle to get that done. And now most of us don't even remember that, and that's a good thing. But I would say, yes, embrace moving forward, make comments to talk about that, but just also be very cautious not to make it sound like you're belittling what you were to the MCU and what the MCU was to you as well. Anyway, Robert, you're hearing Downey Jr. now talking about these things, using language, just, you know, trying to convey he's moved on now, I'm not the MCU, all that kind of stuff. I, for one, again, don't believe it for a second. I don't believe it for a second. I believe, much like the Quentin Tarantino thing, I think he believes it. But remember when years ago when Vin Diesel said, yeah, I'm done with Fast and Furious. Remember years ago when Sylvester Stallone said, I'm done with Rocky. Remember years ago when Sylvester Stallone also said, I'm done with Rambo. I mean, the actors make these great proclamations about moving on from iconic characters, but at some point they get drawn back in, and I think he will get drawn back in regardless. So Rob, 2 questions. What do you think about Robert Downey Jr.'s comments? And number 2, do you think, like me, that he will in some way, shape, or form be back as Tony Stark? Or do you think, no, man, he has done it. He's cutting the cord. He's moving on. What do you think?
Well, last week on Home Video, Fritz Kirsch's 1985 film Tough Turf.
Oh my God!
That stars James Spader,
with Tough Turf
James
with
Spader, and Robert Downey Jr., which came out in 1985. Remember, they had a team up in Avengers: Age of Ultron.
That's right.
They came back, which I call the sequel to Tough Turf. But Robert Downey Jr. has had an amazing career, and if you think about how long we live, say you live till you're 80, you have 8 decades on this planet. Robert Downey Jr. spent 11 of those years that he has on this planet playing Tony Stark, making ungodly sums of money. He basically started the MCU, solidified it with Iron Man 1, saw it all the way through to Endgame. I think there are people in the world, because of everything that he's been through, he wants to go do like 8 episodes of a True Detective. You know, he wants to work with a Matthew McConaughey or another Academy Award winning or nominated actor, and wants to do other things because, you know, these movies are such behemoths, and they're not. When you're an actor in a giant effects film, it's not to say that his portrayal of Tony Stark did not anchor the MCU from the very beginning. But if you're a lifer, if you're an actor like Robert Downey Jr., he's looking to the fact that he wants to play a character when he is 75 and 80. And what's he going to play, Tony Stark, until he dies? Well, fortunately, his character did die. He died in Endgame. He's got a great, graceful way out. If they want to bring him back, he's got that opportunity if he wants it. But I think he's a lifer. He's a true artist. And he wants to go in and he wants to broaden his horizons. He might want to go do a smaller film, play some character roles, maybe bring other actors up with him and shepherd projects into being that he never had the clout or the money to do, which he has now. What he has is enough money and enough power to afford himself freedom. And a lot of artists, especially actors, never get that freedom. And he has that freedom and that power. And I think he's going to spend the next 10 years using it. And using it to do some really exciting stuff. And I, for one, can't wait to see what he does next, as long as it's better than The Judge.
Well, I mean, and I'm glad you brought up The Judge, guys, because, look, I really do think one of the reasons he was still around for Endgame was because of The Judge. I mean, that was his first foray into utilizing this new true power he had, this new celebrity he had as Tony Stark. He was riding high. He had made tons of money. So he and his wife produced this film, The Judge. He got an incredible cast, really interesting script, and the movie just wasn't all that good. And ultimately, it flopped. I mean, it was a flop of a movie. And I think it's taken several years for him to kind of recover from that. I'm not talking about professionally recover. I mean, just himself, with himself. Yep. I think that was a little bit of a sting. Now, look, he's got Dr. Dolittle coming out. I'll be honest with you guys. I don't see that being a big blockbuster. They got a ridiculous list of talent doing voices, but I don't know that there's going to be actually a lot of people interested. I hear nobody ever talking about Dolittle. Nobody talks about this movie at all. Now, of course, he's also got a Sherlock Holmes 3 coming, which could be interesting. But I think all it's going to take is 2 or 3 of these films to not do well, and all of a sudden going back to being Tony Stark might look pretty interesting. But anyway, you know, I'm not a professional actor. Aaron, you are. You know, to be associated in one brand for that many years is a very, very rare thing in Hollywood and in this business. You, as an actor yourself, are sitting back and looking at Robert Downey Jr. I almost said Tony. You're looking at Tony. See, that's how synonymous there. You're looking at Robert Downey Jr. here, and you're hearing these comments. How do you respond to those comments? Do these sound like reasonable things he's saying? Do you think it's perfect what he's saying? What do you think about it?
I think that what he's saying is not only absolutely reasonable. I think it really is true, and I think that what he was saying is said in a very graceful way, because we don't know what's gone on behind the scenes for the past 11 years.
True.
And I can tell you firsthand, yes, while I was certainly grateful for a lot of opportunities that I've had in my career, if people knew all the stories stories, which John, you personally know some of the stories, it's not always it's not always sunshine and rainbows, and sometimes you're having to really take it in the rear for your art and on this level by the studios and by the fans. And I do want to caution people from the attitude of you better be thankful that you got to play Iron Man, because there's a sense of ownership sometimes that an audience can have over an actor. I mean, I am small peas, and I've had people write to me say, hey, you better not ever complain about anything because we pay your paychecks, which not really, but kind of. I don't know. It's a very slippery slope there, and I think that absolutely he should have the freedom to go off and do something else. I don't imagine that he thought when he entered into this that 11 years later he would still be playing this role. And I mean, imagine, yes, like the money he's made, he's had so much money, but at a certain point the money is enough. And sure, we all want to be the popular kid that gets to sit at the cool kids table at lunch, but what if you and your family can never go out to eat because you're constantly being stalked? He has to worry about the safety of his children. Like, there is a downside to that, and I don't blame him for wanting to separate himself from people that are constantly coming up going, my kid wants to talk to you, my son. Yeah, that can probably, after a decade, get kind of annoying. And also, let's not forget that while Jon Favreau did fight for him for this huge role, which was a major risk, before that we had Shane Black saying, hey, in Kiss Kiss Bang Bang,
yep.
saying, hey, I'm going to drug test you anytime I want, and if you don't walk the line, then you're out of this movie in a heartbeat. And kudos also to his wife, who he has said was such a big part of his recovery. I'm looking forward to seeing what he does. I forgot all about Chaplin, but you guys are right. At the end of the day, Robert Downey Jr. is a magnificent actor, one who can transform himself. And I totally understand him wanting to separate himself from the MCU, at least for now. And maybe when he's 75, he does a quick little cameo in something. But I see him wanting to go on to different projects and create the life that he wants to live. And I don't blame him for that. We should all want that for ourselves and each other.
Well, guys, the question here is this. What do you think of Robert Downey Jr.'s comments? And do you think he'll actually ever be back? As a matter of fact, that is today's question of the day. The question of the day today is simply this. Even with Robert Downey Jr.'s comments, do you think he'll actually be back as Robert Downey Jr.? Jump over to my Twitter, which you can just see my handle right here, just simply at John Campea. At the very top post is that question. And I put it up there just before the show started. There have been about 1,500 votes right now. Only 39% of you are agreeing with me that yes, he'll be back. Right now, 61% of you guys are saying no, he's done. He's now moving on to the next phase. What do you guys think? Jump on down in the comment section below and let me know your thoughts. All right.